the ideologues do not want the truth to be said, and anybody who says it, you and I do are of that party. Uh, I mean, I've gone through quite a few um, all sorts of attacks. They want to silence you.
Gabrielle Kubi, it's such a joy to talk to you. Now we've met each other personally, and little did I know that not too long ago I delivered a letter of yours to Jordan Peterson, actually, which I hope we'll get to talk about. But I want to talk about a couple of your books, and we'll introduce those two books. And I'm guessing we'll end up splitting this because we've got a lot to talk about, and you cover an awful lot of ground that an awful lot of other people miss. So I really want to share what you've got with our viewers and our listeners. But before we begin, why don't you take a moment, if you're willing, just to say hi to us and introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi to all the viewers and listeners. I'm delighted, Tony, that you are inviting me. And I very much enjoyed meeting you just recently in December in Warsaw.
And you are, of course, you're a sociologist by train. You're German, obviously. You live and work in Germany, but your books are of international nature. You are a Catholic, and that comes through in your writing. And let me just say straight away, Coalition for Marriage, we have so we're the UK's largest pro-marriage organisation, and we've got tens of thousands of supporters, and they come, Gabrielle, from all faiths and none. Most of them will be Christians, and a lot of them will be Catholic, but they come from all faiths and none. And I want to say straight away that for those of our supporters who support man-woman marriage but have no particular faith, your work is still eminently relevant to them, because you go into the secular evidence base, you go into the secular history, you go into the secular rationale and the potential secular future of all these things. But then, of course, because it's so passionate to you, you do bring your Catholic faith in as well. And so that, if anything, enhances. But the two books I want to talk to you about, your first one is the Global Sexual Revolution, which has a subtitle, Destroying Freedom in the Name of Freedom. And so the second one I want to talk to you about is The Abandoned Generation. And before we jump into both of those books, just define the difference between the two for our viewers.
You asked me what's the difference between the two books. In the Global Sexual Revolution, I describe the predators. Who is doing this? Who makes this ideology become effective in our society? How is this happening? So I'm just describing that on 400 pages. And then I realized what is happening to the young generation. And they are the victims. And nobody talks about it. It's not, of course, not nobody. But it's not a focus. If we ruin our young generation, we ruin our future. It's as simple as that. And so I looked in the numbers. I wrote 13 chapters. What are we doing to our young generation? That they are in a very miserable, very, very miserable state. 30 to 50%, depending on age groups and so on, are physically and mentally ill and needs therapy. There's a belief in therapy. Yeah, they need some sort of healing. Yeah? So I was alarmed as a mother of 3 grown-up children and a grandmother of 5 grandchildren. What is their future?
I think, having read both of those two books, the first one made me angry, and the second one made me very sad.
Yes.
And maybe we'll touch on why that is. So on to the first book, then, the Global Sexual Revolution, and this irony of destroying freedom in the name of freedom. Now, you begin, and the Americans would say you bring your receipts. Yep. So you're not just postulating. You're not just making vague statements. You're showing with a very clear line of descent from where things started, with individuals and individual philosophies, and then moving into multinational global organizations, which then influence governments and schools and the books and the lessons that our children hear. And you you brilliantly, if you don't mind me saying so, you brilliantly show how that happens in the West, if you like, on an international basis. And you do that very, very clearly. But then the genesis of it all is quite interesting, because you've got this phrase, a quote from somebody, that unnecessary eaters need to be eliminated, which is like, oh my goodness. so it's almost as if behind everything, you seem to have discovered a presupposition, a desire, a requirement for depopulation.
Yes.
And how do we depopulate? Well, we trivialize sex, so people don't need to, make families to have sex, don't need to get married, and you provide abortion and you provide contraception, so no babies ensue, and that's a whole other conversation because we've got the highest abortion rates ever. And then you confuse genders, so you don't have to sleep with somebody in the opposite. You can sleep with anything or anyone, and then you get rid of long-term relationships, much like we saw in Stalinist Russia and other places. The usual tactics, if you like. So, is that an accurate assessment? So you talk about the global sexual revolution, but it's almost like you're saying that's come about as an intentional means of depopulation.
Yes.
Have I understood you right there?
That can be proved. It can be shown that the UN and UNFPA, which the population part of the UN, Rockefeller and all of them, and of course, when we had this book, The Time Bomb of Overpopulation, which everybody got scared. Everybody is scared. If we have more people, we will not be able to feed humanity. So these policies, population policies of intentionally reducing population, can be proved. It can be shown, yes, this is the policy. And why was Margaret Sanger given such influence? That was her life's mission, to spread contraception and abortion. Why did Rockefeller himself go to the Pope Paul VI in order to not allow the encyclica Humanae Vitae of 1968 to be published? Yeah, why are they doing all this? They did indeed, this is easy, one can easily prove that, want to reduce population. They still want to do the same thing. I mean, why do states fund International Planned Parenthood Federation, which is the biggest killing agency of unborn babies, and they are state funded? Why is all that happening? But is that enough of an explanation? And I don't really think so. I don't go into it because you get on unsafe ground. You can't prove it, and immediately somebody will shout at you a conspiracy theory, but it just doesn't make sense. Why are people uprooted systematically? Why is identity of people destroyed? What gives us identity? Anything where I can say, I am a German. I am a Catholic. I am a member of my family. All this is I am and gives me identity. All this is attacked. Family is attacked. We Germans especially, are not allowed to be proud of our nation. And now even our identity, whether we are a man and a woman. I think the people who introduce these programs, policies, and ideologies are not stupid.
You say that our minds are being guided by people we've never heard of, and as you're mentioning just there, you talk about identities being reduced to our sexual preference. So the whole idea of national identity gone, family identity gone, religious identity gone, work identity gone, but actually your identity exists in who you want to fulfill your basest carnal desires with. And again, it's almost like that was the other thing that the conflict, if you like, between those who say, like Unwin, that actually societies become great when they restrain and restrict their sexual desire, and those who say no, the chief fulfillment of man is when you get to indulge your desire as much as you want to, and that's actually how man becomes fulfilled. So there's those two conflicts you highlight very well in the book.
I mean, they are just masters in using language. And I don't think people are aware how serious it is that our language is intentionally distorted. All the concepts for sexual chastity and restraint and moral guidance are we are not allowed to use anymore. Even the word chastity. I mean, just use the word chastity, and people will raise their eyebrows. Or on a more general level, even the word sin. Even the church, they speak of mistakes and not of sin. Because sin, this word means it disturbs or even destroys our relationship to God. And if you don't believe in God, the word sin is meaningless. So they're getting rid of all these virginity. Jungfräulichkeit in German is, how can you talk about that? In what age are you living? Yeah. So they're taking away certain our words where we can communicate the important ideas, and they're carefully and sophistically introducing new words which do not mean what they're actually meant to mean, but are carriers are distorted to carriers of an ideology.
And you talk about cleansing the language for things like same-sex marriage, and so you talk about how actually same-sex relationships are characterized by promiscuity. That the idea is that you're not monogamous. That's not what it's about. Which means you take the concept of marriage and then you change it into something which is not what marriage was originally there for, i.e., monogamy between a man and a woman, and raising the next generation. Well, of course, that's something very, very different. I've been looking on social media. We did a story about this lady a few weeks ago in the UK who'd slept with 100 men in 12 hours or 24 hours. And the irony is, Gabrielle, that some of our liberal elites kind of raise an eyebrow and say, oh, well, I'm not sure about that. But it's completely consistent with a culture that says the only thing which is important is consent. It's a different concept to what you were talking about, the idea of chastity, saving sex for marriage, restraint, that sort of stuff. A completely alien concept today.
I suppose you and me are day by day absolutely astounded how far all this goes. We wouldn't have imagined that a woman boasts she has slept with 1,000 men in 12 hours or whatever it is, and that the media give attention to it. I want to comment on the consensus principle. If that did work as they claim, would we have so much abuse? Would we have so much rape? Would we have the 16-year-olds rape younger children? They are now the age group with most, the predators with are 16-year-old boys. Would we have gangbangs? Would we have mass rapists in our streets now? It seems it does not work. And of course, it cannot work. Because if you want a consensus principle, you have to be able to control your sexual drive. Because unless if somebody else says, no, I don't want to have this technique, method, or sex at all, then this person must be able to control their tyrannical sexual drive. Since our whole society and our sex education, starting with children in kindergarten or daycare, yeah, if it's all geared towards fulfilling and even awakening sexual desires in babies, as Kinsey did, if it's all geared to that, how can that be controlled? So it's all phony.
We have a professor in the UK called David Payton, who I've interviewed, a professor of industrial economics. And his research is very clear. The more we teach children about sex, the more sex they have.
Of course.
What we do in response is say, oh, well, in that case, we need to go into more and more detail. And you talk in the book, very interestingly, about how even, from 5 years old, that children are taught to touch themselves sexually. And that from a very young age, they're putting condoms onto fake genitalia, and how this is all intended to remove the concept of shame at an early age, exactly, which makes them more malleable for sex. Exactly. And you also talk, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit. So you talk about the international associations, the UN and the EU, the World Health Organization, and the Yogyakarta principles, and how most people won't know the educational frameworks that these organizations are putting forward, but that our local authorities and our schools are using as the basis of what our young prepubescent children are taught in their sex education classes. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I want to come back to the beginning of what you said, that our children are taught, shown how to masturbate in a very early age, but in the age group of 0 to 4. This is in the so-called Standards for Sexual Education of the World Health Education, which is a collaboration of the World Health Organization and the German state organization Bundeszentrale für gesundheitliche Aufklärung. So a state institution. They who are responsible for flooding the country with leaflets for sexualization of children. It's not sex education, it is active sexualization of children. This is what is happening. And the source of this is Alfred Kinsey. And there was this Kinsey report when I was studying, beginning of the 70s. Kinsey was very famous. The Kinsey report on male sexuality and then on female sexuality said every man is promiscuous, just about every man has homosexual desires. His famous table 32, he had a table how many orgasms a baby can have in what time. It's just simply a proof of violent sexual abuse of babies. Yeah? And there was this woman in America who put all this into light. So this idea that children need sex, Kinsey is one of the fathers of this idea. Children are sexualized actively by our state institutions. And in Germany, they are forced we have no homeschooling. No homeschooling is allowed in Germany. You go to jail if you try to do it. The children are forced to attend these classes. And they take in so-called experts from outside who send out the teachers, so the children are free to speak what they want, and then they put all their stuff on them. And really, they traumatize children. They come home and say, I will never have sex again, I will never marry, and so on and so on.
The subtitle of the book is Destruction of Freedom in the Name of Freedom. And in the book, you talk about the homosexual movement being the spearhead to remove democracy. So again, there's in terms of underlying motives, that seems to be another one that's coming through, is that this idea of restricting and removing democracy. And we're seeing it all over Europe and including in the UK. So things like talking about banning so-called conversion therapy. Now, we know that all sorts of coercive practices are already illegal, but what they want to do is ban certain words. So there are things you cannot say. And you talk at length in the book about the politicization of science. that there are some things we're not allowed to talk about anymore, even though the science is pretty clear. And you give the example there of actually children growing up in same-sex households, the outcomes, and it sounds offensive, but it's just objective fact. The outcomes for children aren't as good, and that's people like Mark Regnerus, people like Professor Paul Sullins, will show the evidence on that, and will get castigated for daring to say it. But there it is, and nevertheless, it's ignored by adoption agencies. It's ignored because there's an overarching ideological desire to promote something for whatever reason, and that something is not what you just mentioned, which is growing up with your biological mum and dad, which the evidence is very clear on a population base brings about outcomes which surpass everything else by a very long way.
We have in our culture this idea that science is dedicated to the search for truth. What else? This is not in place anymore. And said Regnerus, for instance, who made studies that children of same-sex couples have increased difficulties and burdens of their life of severe kind. He proves it scientifically. They tried to throw him out of his university. They tried to prove that his research was not sound, but it was so sound, could not throw him out. And he says, since he's into that research, it's a firewalk, I think is his expression. And he's attacked. The ideologues do not want the truth to be said. And anybody who says it, you and I are of that party. I've gone through quite a few all sorts of attacks. They want to silence you.
Yeah. And this is not to say that in a liberal democracy, people shouldn't get to live how they want to. But when it brings children into the conversation, that's a whole other thing.
Exactly.
And that's the thing. But you're also very practical in this book, and perhaps we can wrap up this book by just talking about so what? So where do we go? So what do we do about this?
Well, we are in an interesting historical phase at the moment. Trump, against all prognosis, won the election triumphantly. Now he has won the elections, and he made a very interesting declaration. He said on the very first day of his administration, he will ban all this gender and transgender programs. And he has his advisor now, or more than an advisor, is Elon Musk, who has lost, that's his own expression, he has lost one of his 10 children to transition. So something new is happening. And if America really makes a 180 degrees turn, the USA, it will be more difficult for other countries. Now, if a country like Hungary or Russia, the enemy, of course, of Europe, if they make a law that says we will not have homosexual and transsexual indoctrination of our children in kindergarten and school, the European Union goes wild against Hungary, for instance, and says that pulls out all the sanctions they have, which is all money, and calling Russia a tyrannical state because of that, because they will not have their children indoctrinated. So there is a turn now. And of course, the most surprising, well, and since Elon Musk bought Twitter, X now, and since there's free speech on Twitter, that is very new. And the European Union tries to do something and say this has to be abolished or whatever. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There seems to be a little bit of a political shift, but how we get there is the massive challenge, of course. Listen, Gabrielle, we'll leave that book there. I would really recommend people go and read it because I think it's such a vital book. It's as comprehensive on the issues as any book I've come across,
Really.
and the attention to detail, the receipts, as I mentioned, it's superb, and I recommend everyone
I'm
read it. I really,
delighted.
really do.
Thank you very much.